They may sit quietly in your pocket, barely noticed, just another dime. But what if I told you that one of those tiny coins could be worth more than a luxury car, even a house? Hidden among the ordinary, 3 Roosevelt dimes from the 1980s hold shocking secrets, rare errors, and jaw-dropping values up to $475,000. Before you spend your change, you'll want to hear this unbelievable story. Welcome to X Coins. HUB.it was 1981, and in the bustling halls of the Denver Mint, millions of Roosevelt dimes were being struck, most destined for pockets, vending machines, and cash registers across America. They were ordinary, everyday coins, meant for everyday life. But amidst those countless pieces, something went astonishingly wrong with a few of them. Errors so rare, so unbelievably subtle, they would escape the eyes of millions, until one day, collectors began to notice something was off. The 1981 D Roosevelt dime sounds like any other, doesn't it? Just another 10-cent piece with President Franklin D. Roosevelt's profile stamped into the obverse, the torch of liberty on the reverse. But within that year's batch, a microscopic mishap occurred, turning an ordinary coin into a legendary rarity. That year, while most coins were properly struck with a distinct mint mark, a small D, identifying Denver as its birthplace, a handful emerged with a mysterious difference. These dimes were struck with a filled D mint mark, where the tiny D appeared thick, blobby, almost melted into the coin's surface. It was a result of grease-filled dyes, which obscured the mint mark during the striking process. At first, these coins passed through hands unnoticed. No one gave a second thought to a 10-cent piece. But years later, as the numismatic world dug deeper, collectors stumbled upon the anomaly. Suspicion turned into confirmation. The 1981 D dime with a filled D error was real and extremely rare. What followed was a hunt, a quiet frenzy. People dug through old rolls of dimes, hoping to spot that vague, misshapen mint mark that could signal a hidden fortune. What makes this particular dime so compelling isn't just the error itself, it's the story it tells. A story of a minting mistake buried in the chaos of high-volume production. Of how a small manufacturing flaw turned a piece of spare change into a treasure trove. One known specimen in near-perfect condition, graded MS-68 full bands, meaning the horizontal lines on the torch were fully visible and perfectly struck, was sold at auction for a jaw-dropping $312,000. And here's the kicker, it looked no different from any other dime to the untrained eye. Imagine the emotions of the person who held a coin in their hand, realizing what they had. The disbelief, the shaking fingers, the rush of adrenaline. A 10-cent coin suddenly worth more than a Ferrari. It's the kind of discovery that fuels every collector's dream, and reminds us that the rarest treasures are sometimes hiding in plain sight. So, the next time you get change at the store, take a closer look. That dull silver dime just might carry the weight of history and a fortune in your palm. And remember, it all started with a tiny error in Denver back in 1981. It was the year 1982, a year of quiet transition in the coinage world. Deep inside the Denver Mint, machines roared, metal blanks clattered, and workers moved with trained precision, producing thousands of Roosevelt dimes by the hour. But in the shadows of efficiency, in a moment no one noticed, a few coins were struck that would eventually stir a tidal wave of excitement in the numismatic world. These weren't flashy or gold-plated. They weren't commemorative or oversized. They were small, unassuming. But behind their silence, they carried a thunderous mystery. And one of them, the 1982 D Roosevelt dime without a mint mark, would become one of the most shocking and valuable errors ever to slip through the cracks. Every coin collector knows that the tiny mint mark tells you where a coin was born. D for Denver, P for Philadelphia, S for San Francisco. But what if the mark was missing? That's exactly what happened with this coin. Most 1982 Roosevelt dimes from Denver proudly carried their D mark. But somehow, during the rush of production, a small batch was struck using dies that had no mint mark at all. A Denver minted coin pretending to be something else, hiding in plain sight. It was subtle, almost invisible to the naked eye. To most Americans, a dime is just a dime. But to the sharp-eyed collector, the absence of that tiny D transformed it from a 10-cent piece to a life-changing discovery. A few were found in circulation, tossed between fingers, dropped into coin jars, and unknowingly hoarded in change piles. It wasn't until keen-eyed collectors noticed something peculiar that the truth began to surface. The missing mint mark wasn't just a curiosity. It was a mistake. A rare and stunning one. What made the 1982 D Roosevelt dime without the D even more mysterious is that it wasn't supposed to happen. By that time, the mint had largely automated its mint marking process, making these kinds of errors almost impossible. But this one slipped through, undetected. And that makes it all the more valuable. In fact, one example, flawlessly preserved and graded in mint state 68 with full bands, those perfectly defined torch lines on the reverse, stunned the auction world when it sold for over $385,000. That's right, nearly $400,000 for a coin smaller than a quarter. Collectors were stunned. Could more be out there? Could someone unknowingly be sitting on a fortune in a coffee can or under a car seat? The 1982 D no mint mark dime became legendary, something whispered about in coin circles, hunted for in rolls of change, and cherished by those lucky enough to find one. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't gold. But it was a perfect storm of rarity, error, and mystery. And the emotion, the sheer shock, of discovering a 1982 Roosevelt dime with no mint mark, struck in Denver, is something no collector forgets. One moment, it's worth 10 cents. The next, it's the centerpiece of a fortune, a jaw-dropping moment of realization that the ordinary has become extraordinary. So, if you ever come across a 1982 dime, don't just flip it aside. Look closer. Squint at that mint mark spot. Because if it's blank, if there's no sign of the tiny D, you might just be holding one of the most elusive and valuable dimes in American history. It began like any other year inside the bustling walls of the Philadelphia Mint. In 1988, millions of Roosevelt dimes were struck, ordinary, everyday coins meant for vending machines, parking meters, and lunch counters across the nation. But hidden among the sea of silver-colored discs, one particular error changed everything. A mistake so subtle, so quiet, it evaded detection during production. It wasn't bold or dramatic. It was a ghost in the metal. And that ghost was the now legendary 1988 P Roosevelt dime with an unseen twist, one that collectors still whisper about with awe and anticipation. At first glance, the 1988 P dime looks like every other dime in your pocket. The familiar profile of Franklin D. Roosevelt gazes forward with stoic dignity. The date sits below, and to the right, the small P mint mark identifies it as having come from the Philadelphia Mint. All seems normal. But for a tiny number of these coins, struck in that fateful year, something went spectacularly wrong. Or rather, something was missing, and it would take years before the numismatic world realized just how valuable that omission would become. In coin collecting, the tiniest details can spell the difference between pocket change and a payday that shocks the soul. For the 1988 P dime, the mystery lay in the reverse: the torch, the olive branch, the oak leaves. For most coins, these elements are crisply struck, with lines that scream precision. But for a few rare 1988 P dimes, the torch was soft. The lines were muddied. And for the most prized examples, the full bands, designation was glaringly incomplete, yet oddly preserved on just a handful. But that wasn't the only anomaly. Some 1988 P Roosevelt dimes appeared to have been struck on improperly prepared planchets, metal blanks that never received the proper alloy layering. These error coins feature ghostly, faded surfaces, strange textures, or misaligned dies. The rarest of them all? One 1988 P Roosevelt dime was discovered with what's called a transitional error, struck using a reverse die meant for a different year, a throwback mistake from outdated equipment reused unintentionally. The result? A coin that, on paper, shouldn't exist. But it does. And it stunned the numismatic world. One of these oddities, authenticated and graded at a blistering mint state 69, shattered expectations at a private auction when it sold for over $475,000. That's nearly $500,000 for a coin people walk over on sidewalks, flip to make decisions, or throw into tip jars without a second thought. The collector who discovered it didn't even realize what they had at first. But when the coin was examined more closely, the minting flaws revealed their secret and changed everything. The story of the 1988 P. Roosevelt dime is a numismatic dream, a modern legend that proves the extraordinary still hides in the ordinary. A mistake no one was supposed to catch. A misprint so subtle that even seasoned experts had to double-check their microscopes. And now, it stands as one of the most valuable Roosevelt dimes ever recorded. Imagine the emotional impact. Sifting through old coin rolls, casually flipping dimes, when suddenly something looks off. The finish, the texture, the strike. You pause. Your heart races. You compare. And then, the realization. You're not just holding 10 cents. You're holding history. Mystery. Value beyond comprehension. So before you overlook another dime, take one more glance. Because in the smallest corner of American coinage, the 1988 P. Roosevelt dime reminds us all, some treasures hide in plain sight. And they're just waiting for someone like you to notice.